Hi, welcome to a brand new video of the Target Individual Program, the Target Individual Experience. So, like I always talk about, that one of the things that I like to do before I speak on anything is to try to find out more about what it is I'm speaking about. See, a lot of people, they want to call me conspiracy theorist, crazy, what have you. When I talk about my targeting, and not just my targeting, but the targeting of targeted individuals and what the technologies that have been developed to manipulate our minds, to not just our minds, but the minds of anyone and anything. Could be an animal, could be an insect. Uh, you know, these technologies do exist. So I'm just going to scroll through. This is a article. This is called "Opening Pandora Box." Okay, it talks about how technology and communication and cognition may be shifting towards a psycho-civilized society. Now, when he says psycho, this is by Kinley Dennis. So when he says psycho-civilized society, where have we heard this before? Dr. Jose Delgado, he wrote a book called Psycho-Civilized Society. Okay, so again, um, for TIs out there, you know, go to this website and show your family, your friends, if you still have friends, okay, uh, that these technologies do exist and that what you're experiencing, okay, and what you're experiencing. I wouldn't even want to say what you believe, but what you're experiencing is because you're being targeted with these weapons, okay? So let me just uh, read a few um, paragraphs. Okay, so increasingly there are indications that the use of wireless technologies has been developed to target an individual biological body with specific focus upon the uh, neuronal functioning of the brain. In this paper, I'll examine how some of these uses have had detrimental effects and what this implies for both present and upcoming development for particular wireless sensor technology. I considered whether this is not shifting dangerously towards a psycho-civilized society where greater emphasis is placed upon social control and preemptive strategies. Introduction. The rate of technological innovation in some fields is developing exponentially, with new advances in wireless sensor network, ambiguous and passive computing modes, uh, nodes, and grids, and media platform. Information flows are increasingly not. I just said the word media platform and hear the police sirens very low again. Um, you know, one thing they've been doing is sending threats, using the police to send threats that if I go to the media to talk about what they did to me, that I'll be arrested before I can get to whichever media person, even also, for example, I wanted to again contact the ACLU, and all of a sudden they started sending me subliminal message that if I get on the train, go into the city, I'll be arrested. It's always to try to keep you under control, to manipulate you, to scare you, so that you cannot expose what it is that they've done to you. Okay. Anyhow, let me just continue here. Where was I? Okay. Uh, so, okay, information flows are increasingly not only in their quantity and density, but also in their immersive quality. The historical development of information communication systems can be said to have traced a similar path of to how nation states have organized their global power base and dominance. First, power over the land and dominance in raging war on one's neighbor through ground battle, the domesticated horse and the infantry soldier. Second, domination of the seas and the strongest navy gave advantage to seafaring empires such as Portugal, Spain, and Britain. The end of naval dominance then gave rise to the advent of the railroad and the dynamic change in transport technology, both in routes and in speed. The transcontinental scope of the railroads finally gave out to air power, winning the world wars through dominance in the sky. And now, finally, the final frontier is space, for the vast potential resource base of outer space is presumably so enormous, effectively inexhaustible, that any state that can control it will ultimately dominate the Earth. Likewise, modern communication technologies have moved from the land, the telegraph, to the sea, wireless radio, radar, back to land, cable, fiber optics, and to the intermediate land air stage, mass antenna, to the outer frontier of space satellite, and finally, now even beyond these frontiers, towards a solar system internet, Turner 2007. Whoever controls these channels for communication can, in some degree, to be said to dominate the Earth, and the possible uses of wireless communication for the dissemination, targeting, and receiving of clandestine communication is an active industry. The aim of this paper is to examine some of the examples and instances where the use of wireless technologies have been developed to target an individual's biological body with specific focus upon the, the neuronal functioning of the brain. I also show how some of these uses have have had detrimental effect. Sorry, I'm reading from my phone, so it's kind of hard to see. And what this implies for both present and upcoming development, in particular wireless sensor technology. This paper shows that an upcoming areas of importance is neural technology, a discipline that places brain functioning and knowledge of the human brain as primary. Technologies are now being researched, not now being, it have been, and trailed that seek to penetrate and, to a degree, intervene in neural functioning. While some have termed this positively as a coming neural society, Lynch, 2004, I considered whether this is not shifting dangerously towards a psycho-civilized society, where greater emphasis is placed upon social control and preemptive strategies. I trace a timeline that follows development from a historical context to the present day, and finally to future scenarios and implication. It may be that social pursuit of increasing connective and immersive technology has the potential to open up a Pandora's box of problematics. Opening Pandora box. The background to this narrative begins with the story of the True Pandora Box, a U.S. project titled Project Pandora that was organized and administered by the Psychological Division of the Psychiatry Research Section of Walter Reed Army Institute of Research, WRAIR. This project was set up to specifically research program on the health effect of microwave exposure following the Moscow embassy incident from 1953 to 1976. Now, I want you guys to pay attention to the date. Like I said, always pay attention to the date when you're doing these research, right? When you're trying to find out how long they've been working on these projects, how long they've been working on these technologies. Because when you read, you know, articles today in the newspaper, what have you, for example, what happened to the U.S. diplomats in Cuba at first, where the FBI and the CIA and the State Department claim that no such technology exists, but we know that it it exists because you from right here from 1953 to 1976, the Soviet directed microwave radiation at the U.S. embassy in Moscow from the roof of an adjacent building. Whilst this clandestine microwave targeting was allegedly known for some time by a U.S. official, the event was not made public until 1976 when when the U.S. State Department finally accused the Soviet Union of bombarding the U.S. Embassy in Moscow with microwave radiation for illicit purposes. It was initially reported as a harmless procedure for charging Soviet spy bugs. Okay, now imagine that, right? This is what they're saying, right? They're saying that it was initially thought to be that they were beaming the microwave so to charge the batteries of the bugs. So we talk about wireless charging, right? Wireless charging is not new. Okay, understand that wireless charging, it is not new, right? So if they thought that the Soviet was beaming the embassy to charge their bug device, you can surely assume that the U.S. was working with microwave technology in order to charge batteries. Okay, wireless bat. Sometimes you got to make an educated guess on these things, because obviously, I mean, come on now. Anyway, uh, okay, where was I? Okay, um, so the Soviet antennas, which are beaming the waves in both to charge up the batteries of their listening devices and to jam embassy-based U.S. electronic monitoring of Russian communication. However, the State Department soon indicate that in addition to interference mechanism, the microwave radiation could have serious adverse effect on the health of the occupants of the embassy. This was supported by Soviet data in which Soviet non-ionizing electromagnetic energy (NIEM) research literature reported adverse health effects in laboratory animals and in Soviet radar workers at levels well below the 10 milliwatts centimeter square. Okay, the U.S. ANSI safety recommendation. Okay, so the Soviet was beaming the American embassy at a level that was below what the U.S. safety recommendation was. So imagine us here in the United States. We are being microwaved, right, with a higher frequency or higher wattage of microwave radio wave frequency. Okay? And listen, if as you read, as I continue to read, you will hear some of the effect, right? So when you start to see, people here in the United States, who have never had a history of cancer in their family, all of a sudden they start developing cancer, tumors, you know, it's a possibility that these technologies causing it. Okay? So, despite this being below the US recommended levels, the Soviet standard uh, excluded military personnel, whilst the US did not. Okay? According to the National Council on Radiation Protection and Management, Soviet studies in the area of electromagnetic microwave radiation reported psychological symptoms in the human subjects that include lethargy, lack of concentration, headaches, depression, and impotence. O'Connor note how the Soviet medical journals term these collective symptoms microwave sickness, while the U.S. literature referred to the symptoms as neurasthenia in 1993. Time magazine reported in March 1976 that the State Department launched a medical investigation of the thousands of U.S. diplomats and their families who served in Moscow since the early 1960s. In the wake of the microwave disclosure, former embassy employees and their families have recalled suffering strange ailments during their tenure in Moscow, ranging from eye tics and headaches to heavy menstrual flow. Some point out that former ambassadors to Moscow, Charles Bolin and Llewellyn, I'm not sure if I'm saying that right, Thompson, both died of cancer within the last 2 years. One other Moscow diplomat died of cancer, and 5 women who lived there have undergone cancer-related mastectomies. Although no medical authority attribute these deaths and illness to radiation. Yeah, of course not, because again, when the U.S. want to hide the truth, because they want to also, they are also working on the same technology, and they're also experimenting this technology on uh, people here in the United States. They're going to say, okay, that no, these people, they got cancer. It wasn't because of that. These people have a brain aneurysm. It wasn't because of they were being microwaved. Okay, it wasn't because of that. The U.S. official and military, long before the public exposure, were aware and concerned about the consequences of microwave bombardment of civilians and military target. Now, my question is, why would they become so concerned, right? If the Soviets were using a lower dosage or frequency, right, which was way below what the United States safety limit were, why would they be concerned? Why would they? I mean, we have to open up our minds to think in a more logical way, in a more sensible way, and to always, you know, ask the questions, okay, the right questions, okay, because we want to find out what they're leaving out, what they're not telling the public, what they're not telling those our representative in Congress, okay. Anyhow, uh, so it says so. U.S. official and military, long before the public exposure, were aware of the concern about the consequences of microwave bombardment of civilians and military targets. In 1972, the U.S. Defense Intelligence Agency released an internal report, later declassified through the Freedom of Information Act (FORZA) program, that had been previously prepared by the U.S. Army Office of the Surgeon General Medical Intelligence Office, entitled Control Offensive Behavior. And by the way, I have that document. Okay. The USSR initially released in July 1972. The report state this report summarized the information available on Soviet research on human vulnerabilities as it relates to incapacitated individuals or small groups. The information contained in this study is a review of evaluation of Soviet research in the field of revolutionary method of influencing human behavior, and is intended as an aid in the development of countermeasures for the protection of U.S. and Allied personnel. Due to the nature of the Soviet research in the area of reorientation, or the word reorientation, right, meaning brainwash, giving you a new personality. So this is what we see would happen with Kanye West, Candace Owens, and Clarence Thomas, right, who was the Supreme Court justice on the highest court in the land. Okay, because that man have done everything to curtail civil rights for black people in this country. Okay, and he's a black man. All right. So Uh, so the Soviet in the area of reorientation or incapacitation of human behavior. This report emphasized the individuals as opposed to group. Okay, this is why we as TIs we're targeted in a singular manner, right? Which is why we're so spread out, because it is easier to use the technology on us to manipulate us if we are apart from people. This is why they want us by ourselves, isolated. Okay, what was I again? Okay, it is interesting to note that the report author authors believe the Soviet research to be in the area of reorientation, suggesting, listen to this now, suggesting, and this is important, okay, suggesting that the U.S. were worried over concern that the Soviet may be planning a mass zapping of U.S. citizens with the hope of brainwashing them into a newly orientated ideological outlook. The 174-page report is extensive, with much material extended upon various forms of beam energy and wireless strategies. On the opening section on electromagnetic energy, the report concludes that super high frequency electromagnetic oscillation os- uh, oscillations, SHF, may have potential use as a technique for altering human behavior. Soviet Union and other foreign literature sources contain over 500 studies devoted to the biological effect of SHF. Lethal and non-lethal aspect has been shown to exist. It contains in certain non-lethal exposure, definite behavioral changes have occurred during. But again, when they say non-lethal, right? If it causes cancer down the line, it is not non-lethal. Kind of like the tasers that the police use, right? Tasers can actually kill people and have actually killed people, but yet it is still considered non-lethal. Go figure that one. During the time, the U.S. establishment was not naive to the potential of conducting neurological at a distance effect upon human behavior. Okay, in the 1970s, Jose Manuel Rodriguez Delgado, that talked about, he wrote the book, okay, Psycho Civilized Society, all right, which they have now termed it to be a novel, right? Okay, so imagine how they try to hide shit, all right. So in the 1970s, Jose Manuel uh, Rodriguez Delgado was a controversial figure in the neuroscience, a professor of physiology at Yale University. He was an acclaimed neuroscientist. In 1970s, the New York Times magazine hailed him in a cover story as the impassioned prophet of a new psycho-civilized society whose members would influence and alter their own mental function. Yet 2 decades earlier, in 19 listen to this now, in 1952, Delgado co-authored the first peer-reviewed paper describing long-term implantation of electrodes in humans as an example of the achievement into wireless, listen to this, wireless neurological devices. Delgado's most famous experiment took place in 1963 at a bull breeding ranch in Cordoba, Spain. Delgado implanted radio-equipped electrodes, which he termed stemosivas, into the brains of several fighting bulls and stood in the bull ring with one bull at a time and attempt to control the action of the bull by pressing buttons on a handheld transmitter. In one instance, Delgado was able to stop a charging bull in its track only a few feet away from him with the press of a button. Okay? The New York Times published a front page story on the event, calling it the most spectacular demonstration ever performed of the deliberate modification of animal behavior through external control of the brain. In 1969, Delgado described wireless brain behavior modification. And remember, wireless brain in 19 in the 50s and 60s now. Okay, this is not the 2050. Okay, this is not the year 2185. Okay, this is the past. We're in the present. This is the past. So remember, I keep saying, when they start telling you these things don't exist, it's bullshit. They exist. They've been existing. They've perfected it. And one of the books I just got is called uh, the Controlling the Human Mind, right? By what's his name again? Uh, shit, I forgot his name. But anyway, his father was a senator who died in a plane crash. He's from Alaska. And I can't believe I forgot his name. I forgot his name. I was just reading, his book too. But anyhow, um, so in 1969, Delgado described wireless brain behavior modification and its implication in his book Physical Control of the Mind Towards a Psycho-Civilized Society, 1969. Delgado research during this time was supported not only by academics grants, but also by the U.S. Office of Naval Research. This research is now over 40 years old, and much has happened in the intervening 4 decades. Technology can be wirelessly transmitted. I'm sorry, so technology can wirelessly transmit information from and to the body of an area of research that was at, attract that has attracted various interested parties post World War II. Such energy information distribution and targeting within the electromagnetic spectrum can variously be used for medical, industrial, military, and telecommunication purposes. Uh, purpose. Uh, I now turn to examine some of the military industrial research and use of wireless technology, beams, firewall, and brain scanner inside the military industrial complex. Researcher Igor Smirnov of the Russian Academy of Science is by all accounts an odd person, referred to by Newsweek article as a subliminal Dr. Strangelove, Elliot and Barry, 1994. Smirnov was apparently contact, con, contacted contact contacted by the FBI during the Davinian sex siege in Waco, Texas in 1993. Experts from the FBI Counterterrorism Center met with Smirnov in Arlington, Virginia to discuss ways to affect the behavior of the Davidian sect leader David Koresh. Smirnov's plan was to send subliminal messages through the phone lines during negotiation, and for targeting David Koresh, the plan was to use the voice of Charleston Heston to subliminally play God. Elliot and Barry, 1994. No, that's not what they was trying to do. Okay. Uh, yeah, they were trying to put words in his mind. Trying to send messages in his mind, but it wasn't through the telephone. Okay. Uh, Listen, I have the declassified documents on that. Okay. Um, so Smirnoff strategy, while sounding eccentric, are closely tied with military research into behavior modification via wireless transmission. See, your cell phone, again, this is one of the things I talk about, cell phones and how through the radio wave um, sender and receiver chip within your cell phone, they can send signals through that also. Okay? And they can send instructions through that also while you're on your phone. And they can do it regardless whether you have a phone or not. Okay? All right, so let's see here. Because before cell phone was invented, right? People used to say that they were receiving subliminal messages. Okay? But of course, they labeled them as being crazy. Okay? So, uh, Smirnoff strategy, while sounding eccentric, are closely tied with military research into behavior modification via wireless transmission. Smirnoff Laboratory in Moscow is named the Institute of Psychocorrection and using electroencephalograph scanning EEG, he measured brainwave which he then computes to create a map of various human impulse brainwave correlation. This data can then be used for experimenting upon affecting brain body modification at a distance. Asked in a 2004 interview whether it was possible to defeat terrorism, Smirnov replied that only informational war is capable of defeating terrorism completely, and we possess this weapon. People action can, in fact, be controlled by unnoticed acoustic influence. Look, it's easy. All I have to do is record my voice, apply special coding, then convert my voice to mere noise and forward. All we have to do is record some music on top of that. The words are, listen to this now. The words are indistinguishable to your conscious, I should say consciousness or conscious mind. However, your unconscious mind can hear them clearly. If we were to play this music over and over again on the radio, for instance, people will soon start developing paranoia. This is the simplest weapon. Okay? Spionage capabilities were demonstrated to U.S. observer as far back as 1991 when infrasound, a very low frequency transmission, was shown to be able to transmit acoustic messaging via bone conduction. Right? So remember they came up with these headphones, bone conduction headphones technology. This is 1991, so which means that this had been developed even before the 1990s. So I talk about it, I say this all the time. The U.S. military, its and the security agencies are at least a decade to 2 decades ahead. And what they do is that they take the technology that they develop and they give it to American tech companies to give them a a leg up on the competition, right? On the foreign competition in terms of technology and technological development. This is why you see most of the computer chip makers, the developers, I shouldn't say the makers, but they who create the computer chips, who create the technology, right, are U.S. companies. Okay, IBM, AMD, Intel. Okay, now the Chinese have came a long way. Why? Because of greed, because of U.S. corporations. You know, they wanted cheap labor, so of course they build their manufacturing in China, and the Chinese government is just and its workers are stealing the technology and developing their own. You know, it just to show you how greed, because they don't want to pay American workers a decent wage. They don't want to pay healthcare to American worker, that they are willing to forego their national security safety, right? But then the same thing they want to talk about is TI, right? Where, where threat to public safety, right? This is what they say, right? Again, I talk about dark projection. Always remember that word, dark projection. Those words, I should say, dark projection. That's what they do. So anyhow, okay. Uh, So Smirnoff capabilities were demonstrated to U.S. observers as far back as 1991 when infrasound, a low-frequency transmission, was shown to be able to transmit acoustic messages via bone conduction. Military strategist Timothy Thomas examined these implications in his paper, "The Mind Has No Firewall," which again I shared with my Facebook family, to just to make them aware of these things. Okay. So, in which he states that we are on the threshold of an era in which these data processes of the human body may be manipulated or uh, debilitated. Debilitated. Examples of unplanned attacks on the body's data processing capabilities as well are well documented. He referenced a Russian military article on the same subject, which declared that humanity stands on the brink of a psychotronic war, with the mind and body as the focus. The context here is that the human body is a complex communication system that is consistently receiving signal inputs, both external and internal. Thus, the data the body receives from external sources such as electromagnetics, vortex, or acoustic energy waves are creates through its own electrical and chemical stimuli can be manipulated or changed just as the data information in any hardware system can be altered. Okay, so I'm not going to continue to read this because, this is, this is going on for over half an hour. But, I recently got a book. It's called No White Lies by Kim Heller. She's a white South African woman, and she talks about how the South African government, which is primarily black, okay, and how they want to be white. So they have done nothing for the black South Africans, though they are the majority of the government. They have no um they have no econ, economic power, and black South Africans, only own about 10% of the land. 70% is still owned by whites, and whites control the economic, the economy. But she talks about how these blacks are African within the US, within the South African government. They all want to be white. Now, like I said, I researched this stuff, so putting this stuff together, I understand that yeah, their minds have been transplanted. Okay, so anyhow, I'm going to end this video, but again, you can find this document, this document on uh, journals.uic.edu. It is called Opening Pandora Box. Okay, I'll talk to you guys in the next video.